I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Always enjoy the music of Gary Hines and Sounds of Blackness. And the theme is always appropriate. Time for reparations, pay up. I'm pleased to begin today's program with a colleague and a friend and a columnist for Insight News, Dr. Irma McLaurin. Dr. McLaurin is a former vice president of the University of Minnesota. She's a former president of Irma, you named the institutions, colleges in North Carolina, Shaw University, and a prolific poet, writer, anthropologist, and award-winning communicator with the National Black Publishers Association, and has a new article coming up in this that I'm excited about. And the article is a piece that is running at University of Massachusetts Press. It's entitled "Black Women Visible and Heard." And when I read it yesterday, decided to publish it with their permission in Monday's paper. I thought it'd be a great conversation for today. And I called you up, Irma, to talk to you to see if you could share the content of that piece. And let's have a general conversation about visibility and being seen, being heard for Black women and Black people. Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Very good to see you as always. And Sister Brenda Lyle-Gray, thank you so much. It is always a great pleasure to talk with you, Al, and to write for the newspaper. I left Minneapolis. It's been 10 years ago. 10 years ago, actually, to the date. And I'm still connected. I have family there. And I think that this piece is timely. I was invited to write about it by the UMass magazine, which goes out to all their alumni and donors. But it's timely because of what has happened with Nicole Hannah-Jones and University of North Carolina, which is right in my backyard. And I've actually written another piece, and I don't know if you're going to run it, but it's called Airing UNC Chapel Hill's Dirty Laundry, because I call it academic Me Too. It happened to me too, applying for a job and then getting told that even though you were more qualified, we hired someone who met the minimum qualifications. And I think for Black women, this is what happens, is that our academic labor, our professional labor gets erased, it gets minimized. And so this article on being visible and heard was very intentional to tell the story of the Irma McLaurin Black Feminist Archive. I am now dedicating my time to curating, identifying, and actually archiving and preserving the contributions of Black women. Not the famous Black women who can get, who have a Genius MacArthur Award. They will be, archived, but really ordinary women who are working at nonprofits, who are community organizers, who are artists, who are academics. And I can't tell you, I talk to women academics and I'll say, well, what are you going to do with your stuff? And they look at me and go, oh, I didn't think my things were very important. So there is this sense that somehow we've been made to feel that what we do and what we contribute is really important. And this my archive serves as a corrective. And this particular story is about why that's important.
You say our stories are necessary and sometimes secret, but they are important and impactful for social change in America. Build out on that.
Well, because we know that if you look at many of the movements that were happening, and a good example is the latest book that's out called The Three Mothers, and it's by a young Black sister who tells the story of how the mothers of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X in particular, and James Baldwin, how their mothers the people we have come to admire. And what she tells us is, in the example of of Malcolm X, Malcolm X's mother was institutionalized for 25 years. She was put in an insane asylum because a white doctor diagnosed her as crazy, in quotes. This is a woman who at 17 left, I believe she came from Barbados, to come to the United States, and she worked for the Marcus Garvey movement. So here is someone in the 1940s who is a Black woman activist, who is advancing Black liberations and reparations, okay, at a time when that was not popular. And she's doing it as a woman. So we know about the Garveyites, we know about the men, but we don't hear about the women, right? And so this tells the story. And then Emma Burtis Jones Baldwin, I'm happy to say that my photograph of James Baldwin's mother is on the cover of that book. And those photographs are archived, are in the Black Feminist Archive. His mother was actually a writer, and she apparently used to write these incredible letters filled with hope and support and resilience to people. And so people feel that his talent for writing wasn't just accidental, it was actually cultivated and nurtured in the environment by his mother. And those stories we didn't know about until just now.
And so the story, the narrative is all important. And as you say, Irma, Dr. McFarlane, it's not just the luminaries, just the superstars that are so brilliant that nobody can avoid seeing them or their flair, in the community. But there is power in acknowledging, excavating, preserving, elevating the ordinariness. And in that ordinariness in our community, there probably is the essential quality that has enabled and will enable us to transform ourselves individually and our society and our world. That's what I'm taking that up from what you're saying.
Absolutely. And lifting them up. I mean, it is this lifting up. And I think all of us can name the teacher, the sisters or the mothers of the church, the neighbors, the people who gave us some kind of inspiration or told us we were doing a good job, who are what Zora Neale Hurston called everyday folk, And so it's great, the luminaries, but in some ways, by always elevating the luminaries, we replicate the mythology of the great white man, the great white one. And we sort of focus on the great Black one. And we don't give enough credit to the everyday folk. If we think about Angela Davis, well, when she was on the run, it was everyday folk who raised money, who kept her story alive, who supported her, who hid her, who fed her, and we don't know about them. And so it's not to take away from the luminaries. We need to lift them up too, but to know that it's bigger than that. And particularly for Black women.
Talk more about the archive. Where did the idea come from? You sort of saying what it's doing, but why are you so passionate about it? And why is it so necessary?
I can't tell you sort of, in some ways, as I'm right now in Gainesville, Florida, packing up a storage unit that I've had here for 18 years. It is filled with books, papers, correspondence. I have correspondence with Chinua Achebe, who is I served as his research assistant. I'm finding a letter that I wrote to Lucy Hurston, who is Zora Neale Hurston's niece, and so somehow I've been preserving those. And I now have to acknowledge my mother, because she passed away almost 10 years ago, and she was living in Minneapolis. But my brother kept her things, and he's sending me. My mother kept the science fair ribbons that I won when I was in the 3rd and 4th grade. She kept the poetry that I wrote, not very good, but I was writing poetry from the time of 8 years old. I have those things. And somewhere in my mind, I think I knew they were important, because I've always kept cards and letters that people sent me. And this is well before computers. And I think computers are going to destroy stuff, because people put it on the computer and then they forget about it. But I've had this sense of collecting and preserving and keeping. And so in 2014, I had left the university, and I began to realize that I needed to have some way of gathering all my things. I'd also begun to do research. I've been researching Zora Neale Hurston for almost 3 decades. And as I went in search of her material, there are a lot of things that are missing, like her field notebooks. But what I found was a treasure trove in the letters that she wrote to Langston Hughes. And in those letters, she described the research that she was doing. I also found, and this is at the Beinecke, and also the University of Florida has some of her archives. I found she used to make postcards, Christmas cards. She used to write poems, the telegrams that she sent. And the reason they are there is because Carl Van Vechten, who was the white photographer who took a lot of the iconic photographs of the Harlem Renaissance, he wanted to honor Charles Johnson, who had died early. And he invited Zora and Langston to send their materials to the library. The director of the library at that time was Beinecke, and they've now named it after him. But the original manuscript of Their Eyes Are Watching God are in that archive. And what we find is, I began to understand how in things that I would not have looked at, I'm looking for notebooks, and it's in the letters that I find this treasure trove of information. And it began to help me understand how important those things are, who we correspond with, what we talk about, the ways in which we support each other. Those things are not always evident. And one of the things that is crystal clear is that history is told through archives. When Ken Burns makes a documentary, he doesn't just make it up in his head, he goes to archives. And if we're not in the archives, we're never going to appear in those documentaries, right? So I became passionate about, one, preserving my own work, because I'm first generation. And, I used to say, if I drop dead tomorrow, heaven forbid, my family would look at all these papers and stuff and say, oh, we just need to clean this up. Not because they didn't value what I did, but because they didn't understand that this stuff is actually, this treasure trove. It tells a story of my life, my career, my creativity. It lets people know who I was connected with, who I corresponded with, who I didn't like, who I liked. All those things are embedded. And we go to archives to get this kind of arc of a narrative, of a life history, of a narrative through papers and photographs. And if we don't have those there, let's go back and look at all of the images of Black women as mothers that have been portrayed on the big screen and television. Usually they were drug addicts. Every once in a while you'd get an iconic figure, but for the most part, they were negative images. So where are the photographs, the letters, the materials that tell us that there were good Black mothers, that Black women held together the family, that they were activists like Malcolm X's mother, that they may not have been published writers, but they were actually writers and people who loved to communicate with people. Where are those stories? They're not on the big screen yet. They're just now barely making their way, into Netflix and that. But historically, that's what's been absent. So I want to make sure that my generation and people who come after me, get preserved, and that there's a place for that. So I say that I'm building an archival home for Black women. And I started that venture in 2014. I did a cold call to the then director, Rob Cox, who's now passed away of renal cancer at the end of last year. And I felt heard. That's what I talk about, is that I talked for 45 minutes. And the next day, Rob sent me a 2-page letter and said, this is exactly what we should be doing. This is exactly what needs to be at UMass. And I'm so glad you got in touch with me. And it's been a collaboration ever since. I feel that I have agency in the process. I'm not just turning something over to them and then they just do something with it. I am actively involved in soliciting, recruiting people. We're going to develop a memorandum of understanding about the archives so that 50 years from now, the idea, the concept that I have is still active, that the people who contribute are agents, that they have a say in how their story and the narrative about their materials gets presented to the world. We're not just turning it over, one, because right now in the field of archiving, less than 4% of all archivists are Black, less than 4%, okay? So that means that across the spectrum of it's something like 3,700 colleges and universities in this country, there's probably less than a handful of Black archivists working there. Many of them are probably like at the Smithsonian or National or City, but they're not in colleges and universities. And yet we represent somewhere about 3 to 5 to 7% of the faculty who ask us for our stuff. If all the archivists are white, all the presidents are white or men, where does our stuff get collected and preserved? So that's been the genesis of it, and it's kind of taken on its own life. I now write about it. I go to conferences. I received a grant from the Wintergren Foundation, which is an anthropology foundation. They gave me a $15,000 historical archive grant. So that's paying for my travel and for me to have people work with me to send it to UMass. And once it's there, I'll be working with them on the descriptions. How do we organize and sort? Right now, they've digitized 397 of my photographs. I have photos of Sonia Sanchez when she was teaching at Amherst College. I have photos of her, a whole roll of film I took when she gave a talk. I have photographs of Jesse Jackson on his first Rainbow Coalition presidential campaign when he came to Amherst. I have photographs of James Baldwin's 60th birthday party that was held at UMass, where there are pictures of him with his mom, which apparently was rare since after that picture appeared on the book Three Mothers, I got calls from CNN Digital, MSNBC, Morning Joe, the Today Show, NBC Universal. They've all shown, they're saying, well, can we also use some of these other photos? So apparently there are these iconic photographs. Toni Cade Bambara, that's in the article. There's a beautiful photograph of her with her hand on her face. And why are they unique? Because they were taken in private settings, right? Most of them. They were taken where people were very relaxed. I've got one of her slouched across the table, like she's like, what's going on here? You don't see those images of Black artists and activists being comfortable, feeling like relaxed. And so those are the kinds of images that are already up in the Digital Commonwealth Library under Irma McLaurin Collections. And so that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm also, one of the people mentioned is a woman named Miss Jones. She is a person who is 97 years old this year. In the 1940s, she received the first master's as a Black person from the University of Washington in anthropology. And they kind of kept her there. Miss Archie Henderson Jones, they kept her there for 8 years because the faculty couldn't quite figure out what the world would do with a Black woman anthropologist. Now, in the 1940s, what were the job opportunities for Black women? You were either somebody's wife, you were either a maid, right? You might get a job as a teacher if you had the education, but there weren't really opportunities. And when you see her, she was the first, one of those photographs is her as the first telephone operator for like what was Bell, I guess Washington Bell at that point. So it tells a story. And what I say is that her work will not be found on Google search. You're not going to find it in Google Scholar. You're not going to find it in JSTOR because she wasn't published. That doesn't mean that she wasn't doing research, but she wasn't. That was a time when they weren't publishing Black academics. They weren't publishing Black anthropologists. So her material, it's important. She asked her daughter to promise to preserve her stuff. And so I'm working with the family to make sure that her records and papers, which are notepads, and, she used to give talks to the community, that those things get preserved. And maybe one day somebody will write a book, about her. And that's my hope, is that this material will be collected in such a way that it will give the opportunity for someone to tell her story using her own words in that respect.
Irma, I so love talking with you because you inspire me every time we talk. I've told you this before, and I'll tell other people. You're one of the few people I talk to that the conversation leaves me with a headache. And the headache is a good thing. It means I can't take no more. But that's a smiling way of saying, boy, this is such a fulfilling conversation. It always is, and I love to hear you talk about your profession. You're becoming an anthropologist, and the question, the notion, the mission of anthropology, and how you have brought our lens to that. So there is the profession as it existed in history and in academia, but it did not include either utilization or application from within our lived experiences. And you have and are doing that. But talk about anthropology, number one. And the other thing that I love talking to you about, Irma, Dr. McFarlane, is you opened my eyes about the value of research, understanding research. I was just either oblivious or unaware or had a blasé attitude. I didn't think about data-driven decision making. And I came to an awareness of the power of that and of the efficacy of guiding our action by meditation, by analysis, by data, and by research. And I want you to talk about that as well, because I think you're opening up how we will navigate the future, how we will navigate the world itself. What do you think?
Well,
talk about anthropology first, and then
let me talk about anthropology. So it is defined as the study of human culture and behavior in all of its permutations. So the four-field anthropology was created by Franz Boas, and that is an American approach. And we call it four fields because we look at linguistics, we look at culture, we look at archaeology, and then we look at biology or physical anthropology. And through those lenses, we try to tell the story of the fundamental question that anthropologists are trying to answer, and that is, what makes us human? We know that there are primates with whom, if you understand or believe in evolution, that we have a connection, but what makes us human? And it is studying how we can speak and have language. And animals may have ways of communicating, but none of them have the verbal capacity. How did that happen? How did we evolve to that? It is also looking at how we got to be bipedal, walking on two legs. At what point did that occur, right? It's also about culture. Culture are the beliefs, values, and practices that are transmitted from one generation to another. So we all have what we know that makes us human is a way of having a worldview. We have particular beliefs and values. All humans have values. We don't all have ethics because ethics is a Western system, right, of kind of codifying values. But we all have beliefs about what's right and what's wrong. What's pure, what's impure, what's true, what's not true. We have beliefs, and even though they vary, there seems to be that consistency in the human family. So anthropology is that study, but historically it was the study of the others. So the difference between it and sociology is that sociologists studied so-called complex societies, that is the Western world, and they looked at the institutions, religion, and structures, schools, and family structures, and these structures. Anthropologists looked at the other, the so-called primitive or non-Western cultures. And so it made that its kind of bailiwick, which is looking at these non-Western cultures, and in many ways using them to compare to the West and using the West as the epitome of what was great and the non-Western of what was wrong with human society, right? And that the idea was that somehow we were on this arc to become Western. Well, we now know that's not true, right? But it is that study of looking at people in relation to their culture and in relation to these structures that kind of describes or typifies anthropology. What that says for me is that I've defined myself as an anthropologist who studies the construction of social inequality. If we're all part of the human family, then why do we have inequality? And in the jargon, why is it some folk got and some folk don't got? How does that happen if we're all human, right? If we're all part of the same species. And the definition of a species is that they can reproduce together. We know under slavery that happens. So we may have this construct of racism, right? But in reality, the practicality is that the definition of a species is that they can reproduce together. And that happens across whatever, race, language, age, all of that happens. So we're the same species. So my question in looking at social inequality is, What makes that possible? How do people navigate it? How do they resist it? And that's why the song on reparations just touched my heart, because they're documenting all these events that have transpired in the arc of African American history since we landed on this, on this country and other continents. And most people don't understand that the largest population of people of African descent outside of Africa is in Brazil.
Right.
Not in the United States. We're
Right.
only 12% of the population here. And many of us didn't actually start here. We were brought here. We know that people came from the Virgin Islands. We know that some people came from parts of the Caribbean. There were some slaves who were bought directly here, but many people came from other places. And slavery here was unique in that it began to see bodies as commodity. That under the other colonial powers, while they used enslaved people as labor, it is only in the United States where the actual selling of bodies, what we now call human trafficking, became a fundamental part of the development of this economy. So it wasn't just cotton, it wasn't just tobacco, it was also the commodification of Black bodies, which meant that Black women were forced to reproduce children even if they didn't want to, in order to have a commodity, a body, a baby's body that could be sold for profit, right? That's the legacy of the United States. And so in order for that to happen, you have to persuade that those people aren't really human, that they're not like us, that somehow they're different. And that's
like your livestock, their livestock.
Right. And that is the underpinning of this ideology of racism. It's a mindset, it's a construct, but it is very deliberate in the sense that it directs people away from the inhumanity of selling a human body, a human being who is just like you, whatever color they are, they're just like you. As they say in Shakespeare, if you cut me, I will bleed. So we all bleed the same blood, and we actually share 97% DNA in common. What we often focus on is the 3% that makes us have different color skin, different color hair type, maybe different features, right? But genetically, we have more in common than we have different. So part of it is trying to disrupt the traditional anthropology and make it tell a different kind of story and broaden how we come to understand the development of the human species, which originated out of Africa. We've now documented that. Everybody owes their existence, whatever they look like, to Africa Eve, right? And to then see how things have developed and why they have developed and what have been the events that have caused disruption and how have people resisted enslavement and oppression, all of these things. We glorify the story in the Bible of Moses and lifting up his people, but no one glorifies the rebellions that Black people had, and not just the overt ones of Nat Turner and John Brown and other people, but also the revolts where people did what we used to call, they did subversive kinds of revolts, slow work, where you just like slow down the work so it don't get done as fast. We know that people who worked in the big house, we had this myth that somehow they had a better life. Well, we know from Harriet Jacobs, aka Linda Brent, that she was subject to rape by her master, and that when that wasn't happening, she was subject to the abuse of his wife, who was mad at her because of what he did, that this woman hid in an attic for 7 years, hid in an attic for 7 years, not enough space, and then managed to get letters sent from another part of the country to make them believe that she had left when she was hiding in an attic space. Okay, we're not talking, right, for 7 years in order to escape being routinely raped. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that when we talk about reparations, we have to understand that this country's legacy of wealth is built on human trafficking.
Yes.
Trafficking of Black bodies. It is built on what we should call a Black Holocaust.
We
right?
should call it a criminal enterprise.
A criminal enterprise.
Yeah.
And there needs to be accountability for
Yep.
that. So part of me is saying, when I went into anthropology, I already had a terminal degree in English. There is no discipline in the Western intellectual tradition that is without blood on their hands or some problem. They all have problems. But it seemed to me that in anthropology, at the moment that I entered into it, 1987, was a moment when there was the rise of feminist anthropology. There was a cohort of Black anthropologists already in place. There were people, whites, interrogating the way in which anthropology's history was complicit in colonialism, and were asking that we rethink how we did things. So there were things that were happening that made it exciting to be part of it, and there seemed to be space. But I also say that I was an anthropologist well before I knew what the words were. Growing up as a Black child in the Henry Horner projects of Chicago, when I was in high school, I was in an Upward Bound program, and I would have to make my way from the west side of Chicago on the L train through downtown, where it was above ground, then it went underground, and then it came out again on the north side of Chicago on Sheridan Road. And that's where all the white people live, because Chicago was and still is residentially segregated. By the time I got to the end of that journey, there were only 2 Black people on the train, me going to this white women's Catholic college, and this woman who was someone's maid. And so I believe that I've gone to foreign territories, white side of Chicago, almost as an anthropologist, trying to understand what is the culture, what is my place here, how do I become a part of this, but also how do I retain my own sense of identity before I had all of the language and the theories and the models. I was actually living it, you know? So it seemed the fit became very comfortable. And at the time I entered anthropology, they were also looking at ethnography as genre, like the way we write anthropology. So my writing background fit very nicely into what was happening. And there was an acceptance that I don't write like a traditional anthropologist. And so there was a space for that I don't think would have happened in other disciplines. So it's attracted me. I feel that I've been very much a part of shaping it. I work very closely with the Association of Black Anthropologists. We have some famous people in there. Of course, people know Dr. Janetta Cole, who was president at both Spelman College and Bennett College. What they may not know is that many of the Black women presidents, at least 4 of them, have been anthropologists. There was Janetta Cole at Spelman and Bennett. There was Niara Sadaka, who was at Lincoln. There was Yolanda Moses, who is at City College, myself at Shaw, and who knows where the future is. I don't know that there's any other discipline where they can point to 4 Black women who went on to become a college president or a university president. And if you count sociology as being kind of a cousin, then we can talk about the president who came after Janetta at Spelman. You know, so we have this amazing history where there is something about the nature of anthropology that prepared us, you know, to be able to do this kind of work. And I think the work I did at UROC illustrates that. I felt like I was actually in the field with 1 foot in the university and 1 foot in the community, in the field. And I approached it as field work. What do I need to understand about this community, right? And to see it through their eyes and not see it only through the way the university saw the community. And I think very powerful work was done there at UROC. I don't always get credit for it, but I know it happened. But the main thing is that it's still happening. And that, to me, that it's sustainable, that it's still going on, and that the community is benefiting from it, is the testament of how you have evidence-based research, right? That we did this research, we were able to utilize that to build a structure and systems that are ongoing, you know, in that way.
For those that don't know, UROC that you're referring to is the University of Minnesota's Urban Research Outreach and Engagement Center. And it's a facility right in North Minneapolis, a few blocks from where I'm sitting right now. I live in North Minneapolis, and it was a shopping center that had gone in disrepair, disuse, just kind of the course of things in urban Black communities.
Yeah.
And the university was successful in responding to requests for engagement from the community, but shaping an engagement at the leadership of Dr. Irma McFarlane that produced a world-class research and engagement center right in North Minneapolis right now. I tell you, it's a pleasure, Irma, though it's been different for the past year because of the pandemic. But prior to the pandemic, to drive from my office to my house past New York every day, I would always smile when I see 30, 40, 50 cars in the parking lot at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 7 in the evening. And then across the street at the Gary Sudduth Center for the Urban League, their parking lot full, 30, 40 cars, people inside meeting, and know that other meetings were happening at North Point Health and Wellness around the corner. So it showed, and it helped motivate a vibrant appetite for community and civic engagement, and that's important. I want to come back, though, and ask you to spend more time, because I think we don't spend enough time talking about the critical role of women's voices. You know, we say it, but we let it be said, but we don't dig deeper. And I want to take the time to ask you to go deeper and sort of redouble the emphasis, the importance on examining and lifting and empowering, enabling, allowing self-empowerment, of not impeding empowerment. I don't know how the right way to say this, but there's more that has to be done. And what is it from your point of view?
I would say one is recognition. We need to do more to recognize not just the iconic figures, but Black women who are involved in the community. And I can think of a number of them who were very actively involved in helping to shape the work of UROC. But when we then presented that work, it was often men who were pushed to the forefront. So I think that we have to do a better job of having that balance of gender and making sure that Black women are presented. I'm seeing more with the emerging Black voices that Black Lives Matter was pretty much a Black woman-led, LGBTQ-led organization, and they created the momentum. But sometimes when you see it come up, it's still men who are put to the forefront, and we just have to be better than that. I would say the other thing is for us to value ourselves. Several years ago in 2017, when I was beginning to just start to talk about the Black Feminist Archive, I was asked to present at a conference of 124 legal law professors, the Ludi Lytle Conference. And Ludi Lytle what we believe to be the first woman Black woman who was born to a former slave to pass the law boards to become certified in the country, right? And so these Black women get together in a writing group. They get together about 4 or 5 days and they write collectively, not on the same thing, but individually. And then they have an opportunity to share their work and give feedback. So I was the keynote, and I stood before 124 women, told this story about my vision of the archive. And then I said, so how many of you have archived your work? One person out of 124 Black women law professors raised her hand. One. And the only reason she raised it is because she was one of 2 Black women deans of law school, 2 in the entire country in 2017. And the librarian had come to her because she recognized the significance. And so when I asked the question, and my colleague, Dr. Cashel Scott, and I do this when we go to conferences, we say, so how are you archiving your stuff? And people give us this blank look and they say, I didn't think what I did was important. And yet we spend all this time working and publishing and teaching and working in communities and being artists, but we don't think what we do is important enough to be preserved. So we have to do better at valuing that. And that starts with our children. I love the hashtag Black Girl Magic. I think the article that I wrote on Naomi Osaka is a good example of a family being very intentional about honoring their daughter to the extent that she was able to stand up to some very powerful people and
Mhm.
say, find me $15,000 if that's what floats your boat, but I'm taking some me time. I'm
Right.
going to take care of me as a Black Asian woman. And that to me was so powerful because they're not, I don't know many adult women who feel like they can afford to do it. So I think we have to do better. We have to do workshops and continue to write articles and support the emotional well-being of Black women. We are dying disproportionately from breast cancer. We are dying, disproportionately, from the maternal, the one, a couple of the articles I wrote called, how racism is getting away with murder,
Mhm.
tells the story of how the maternal health of Black women who are pregnant or who give birth, the mortality rate is immensely high. And here is the irony. Here is the contradiction. It is highest among women, Black women with education,
Ah,
because the data
counter
says if
counterintuitive. Yeah.
yes, it runs counterintuitive to all the data. The data says if you have risky behavior and you smoke, you drink, you run around, you do drugs, then you will have problems. What this is showing is that some of the most highly educated women, right, who have the resources are still suffering from the same issue. And a good example is Serena Williams, right?
Yeah.
This woman could buy her own
Yep.
hospital if she
Yep.
wanted to.
Yep.
And yet, look at what happened. And then afterwards, look at how she was treated. The way that she goes to play, she's wearing compression tights in order to make sure she doesn't get blood clots. And she's told she can't wear that outfit. They weren't concerned about her health.
Hmm.
They were concerned that this Black woman's body didn't fit whatever they thought was the norm. And she's critiqued. And you had white tennis players, when she challenged it, you had white tennis players coming out saying, I've done far worse than that. And they never penalized me. So we know that there's a cost. And I think to bring it full circle back to Nicole Hannah Jones, excuse me, and Me Too, academic Me Too,
Hmm.
is that it's still happening today.
Hmm.
It's still happening today.
Take a minute and talk about Nicole Hannah Jones. Sort of give our viewers another take. Youssef Mgini did a masterful job a couple of weeks ago going through the dynamics of the politics and the structural barriers represented in her experience at North Carolina. But go over that again, if you would, from your point of view, and what is going to be the outcome. How does she benefit? How do we benefit from having once again faced a traumatic and really irrational, but predictable set of circumstances at an institution of higher education that called itself trying to do better and be better?
Well, I think Nicole Hannah Jones won't have any problem. She already has multiple job offers.
Mm-hmm.
But she had the New York Times behind her because of her 1619 project. This is a woman who was trained as a journalist at UNC Chapel Hill. So this is also her alma mater. And
Mm-hmm.
they're saying, we tenured all the white men and women who came before you who held this very same position. It's a rotating position. And we gave them tenure. But we're not so sure, even though you have stronger credentials, you've been anointed with the MacArthur Genius Award that says you're probably one of the, you're among a handful of very creative people, and the world recognizes this.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't think we want to give you tenure. We have some questions about your credentials. There's no benefit to her except that she stands as a symbol because she already has the prestige,
Mm-hmm.
she has the support. But I think what it does is to bring awareness. And that's why I wrote my story, is that some of us don't have that kind of power behind us. And it happens far too often. So 2 years ago, I guess it's going on 2 years, I applied for a position, Mellon funded, at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, called Director of Public Humanities. I have a humanities degree, a terminal degree. I have a PhD. I have an award-winning academic book. I've received the award from the Black Press of America. I've written volumes. I've been a university president. I've been associate vice president at Research One universities like Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, so what else do I need to have to get this job, right? I was at the Ford Foundation. I managed a $10.8 million budget. This budget was like $500,000 to $1 million. I think I could do that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I applied for the position. I didn't even get an interview. So I know ageism is part of it, you know, the white hair. But I also think gender and race. And they had already had a lot of fallout after Silent Sam and the Confederate, you know, statues. And the Black faculty there had asked them to be more diverse and to do more to make sure that the administration was more diverse. So I used that and said, I think this is an opportunity. I think I would be an ideal candidate. Nothing except to get this form letter that says, oh, you know, we found somebody else. And the person they hired, and no offense to her, is a young white woman who had a master's in folklore from UNC Chapel Hill, so she was one of their own, and who had done some part-time work for them. So she had an inside, you know, line. But she didn't have, they had put preferred categories. They had a preferred PhD, someone who had some university teaching experience. They had all of these things. And I thought, you know what? Let me at least go through the exercise of seeing how they justify this. And the process itself was somewhat insulting because their Office of Equal Opportunity and Compliance is pretty much all white. They hadn't read, I sent a letter to the president that basically said something like, what is it about being a former university president, a former associate, you know, vice president, a former twice tenured faculty, an award-winning writer, an award-winning academic? What is it about this that says I'm not qualified?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to know, right? And of course, he sent it on. I went through the process and they sent me back a form letter, which I published in the article because I think people need to see. It's not just making up stuff.
Yeah.
Published the job description and I published the letter. And the letter was really a regurgitation of my own words. They said, you stated this, and then they gave me my words. You said this, and then they published what I said. Mm-hmm. And then they said, and we found no evidence to support it. That's it. They didn't tell me what they had done. They didn't say what the nature of their investigation was. They didn't say what evidence they had to counter. They didn't have to. And my point in making this is that the Nicole Hannah-Jones, she had other options. But there are so many Black faculty and academics and professionals who don't have that option, who are made to feel less than, and who then have to go quietly into the night. So I think what she's done is to expose the contradiction in the sentence that up until this moment, everybody who came through there got the support and tenure with no questions asked, because the process for tenure and promotion is that you are reviewed by the department. It then goes to a college, to the dean, to a college committee. It then goes to the provost. It then goes to the president. So you've had 4 layers of people to either ask questions. If they're not sure, they'll send back questions, you know, and say, well, tell us about her. Could you explain? So the process is such. And it gets to the president, who signs off to send it to the board of trustees. At that moment, it is really more a formality, because all the vetting has been done. It is not the job of a board of trustees or a board of regents to challenge that, because they don't have the credentials to evaluate anybody. Their job is to set policy. And if the procedure was correct, they should have automatically granted her tenure. Instead, and I hope that their accrediting body looks at it, they violated one of the fundamental rules of being a trustee. They got into the operations and the personnel decisions of the institution, which is not their job.
And it was primarily at the behest of one of the trustees, right? Who was a financial advisor who took exception to her work. Is that correct? You know, we don't know. I think one of the students' trustees may have disclosed, but a lot that goes on in these meetings are so-called confidential. Right.
What we do know is that most of the appointees, UNC Chapel Hill is a state institution. And so most of them are appointed by the governor, except that, like the Supreme Court, it was the Republican governor that appointed them. So their terms don't just end when that governorship ends, they extend. So you have a very conservative group, but they violate the most fundamental separation of university day-to-day operations, which is what the president or chancellor is supposed to take care of, and the board, which is supposed to do policy. If the policy of tenure and promotion was followed to the letter, even if they had doubts, they had no choice but to tenure her and chose not to. They did not tenure her. What they said is, we chose not to vote on it.
Okay.
Right? So they didn't say no, they just chose not to have it continue through the process where they wouldn't have to be called to have a vote, because then she would really have a case against them, right? So they chose to take it off the dockets, which then has it sitting in limbo. And the president offered her a 5-year contract without tenure, which is insulting. If you know that everybody else has gotten tenure and you're now told that you can't have it, it's insulting. And so the insult for me in the letter is that they acknowledged that I and other candidates who applied for this job had higher credentials than the person they hired, but the person met the minimal. And it was like, so if you were going to hire the minimal, why would you have, we prefer to have this kind of person? Why would you add in all of these things that you think would be extra? You get people who have them, who look like me, and then you say, oh, well, it's okay if the white person has lesser credentials. They met the minimum, and that person may do a fabulous job, but it is an illustration of how white privilege gets reproduced. She now gets the opportunity. I'm sure she's going to get a lot of support and nurturing to be
make sure she's successful.
On the job training.
Yeah. They can't afford for her to fail.
That's right. And her career will now continue to grow. We'll probably see her as a provost somewhere, or a dean, or the head of a foundation, because they make sure that people who have the credentials don't get the opportunities, and those who don't get an opportunity to gain them. And then they turn around and become our bosses, right? I have been told by, there's an organization called Blue Steps, and it's an organization that hires, that places former high-level executives like presidents and provosts and deans into temporary positions. And I applied for it because I thought, I don't know if I ever want to be a permanent president again, but I might be interested in helping be a transition. Like, as they're looking for, I could help lead the institution in that vacuum. And after going through this, where one of my, I had some pretty good people who were recommenders, including one person who was he was a former deputy commissioner of customs, right? A black person. And all these people, are very busy. They did the thing. And then I get a call from them and they say, we're not sure we can place you. And I was like, well, I told you what my background was. I told you how long I was at Shaw, which was only 11 months, which is a very short tenure. And there's a reason for that. But we don't think we can place you. And so we went through it. And what he basically said is, you don't fit the norm. And the norm for most college presidents is that they were a tenure professor. They then became a dean. They went from a dean to becoming a provost. Every once in a while, you get a lawyer who comes in, and then they move into these high-level positions. I didn't do that route because I was kept out of that route. Those routes were not really designed for people like me. And I said, okay, let me test this. I said, so how do you propose I fix this? What do you propose I do? He says, well, you might want to think about becoming the chair of department. And I'm thinking, you want someone who's already been a university president, who's already been an associate vice president, which are higher status positions, to go backwards in order to satisfy your need to have me fit into this box. We will never fit the box, and Black women in particular. We will never fit the box. And yet the box is still what they're expecting us to be part of. And I think that's the problematic. And we have to find ways outside of universities, outside of traditional, even foundations, the program officers they hire. Everyone is using the term BPOC, Black, Indigenous People of Color.
Mhm.
I find people of color to be very problematic because it's using melon as a condition of inclusion when some of the people who carry that melon themselves practice elitism. They
Right.
practice anti-blackness. They
Mhm.
practice anti-indigenous. Um, and so it's a problematic term, but they are sort of the escape hatch. Oh, we
Mhm.
don't have any black people. We don't have any indigenous people, but we have people of color,
Right.
right? That can be anything.
Yep.
And that means that those people don't have the same political understanding of the history of this country. Its emphasis, its wealth, its power is built on anti-blackness, and we have to contend with that. And it's built on gender bias, and it's not just women, but trans people. And we have to begin to talk about those things openly, to say academic me too, it happened to me too, and this is the institution it happened to. I think we have to call them out and be more vocal about it and not just let them go quietly and continue to do what they do. And they do it well.
Do you know Dr. Karen Hunter by any chance, or Dr. Greg Carr? I've become fans of theirs watching them. They have a program on YouTube every week,
Mhm.
Saturdays, I think, called In Class with Karen Hunter
Yeah.
and Greg Carr. Greg Carr was I think, the dean or is the dean of Africana Studies at Howard University. And I'm not sure which university Karen Hunter worked with, but she's been a social media phenom for a long time and has created a huge following. And the two of them have hooked up and created something that's emerged as the largest classroom on the planet. They've got thousands of people on their regular Saturday classroom, and the classroom is pretty much what you and I have just been doing, one acting as host and the other presenting both expertise, context analysis, and it's powerful and it's wonderful. And they've taken that to another level because they have been able to attract academicians from all over the country, all over the world, and technologists who are able to build a an electronic or digital institution.
Mm-hmm.
And they're creating a college. They call it Narrative with a Knarrative. But I want you to check it out and look at it, because in talking with you, Irma, Dr. McFarlane, see that as one of the capabilities of the archive as well.
Yes.
The model that they have created is one that I'm sure they want to see replicated,
Yes.
again and again and again and again. It's never mine only. It's how do we keep making these things happen, and that of their own volition and because of the common vision, these energies, these ideas, and these people and these works will link up when and where appropriate.
And this is
yeah.
using primary materials, so it's preserving it so that it can we can go back. And I should say that it's not just Black women who are in my archive. There are white people who want to be allies. We have the papers of Larry Paris, who I knew because the archive at UMass Amherst is an archive of social change. They have the W.E.B. Du Bois papers. So one of my collaborators is the W.E.B. Du Bois Center. And my hope is down the line, we will be able to have a McFarlane Black Feminist Archive Center. We also they have the papers of the disability movement. They have the photographs of the woman who was the original photographer of NOW, the National Organization of Women. David Levering Lewis, who was the biographer, the Pulitzer Prize winning biographer of Du Bois. His papers are there. So there's this constellation. And what I'm bringing to the table range from people like Archie Jones Henderson, or Archie Henderson Jones, Miss Archie, who are not so famous, to people like one of the people that I'm talking to is a woman named Connie Fredericks. And it is her sister, Carol Fredericks, whose material we want to have in the archive. Now, why is she important? You could call Carol Fredericks the Josephine Baker of the 21st century. She was a Black woman who went to France in the late 1970s without speaking a word of French, learned French, became the talk of the town. What makes her significant? She used to do backup for people like Celine Dion, but she and her group which were two Frenchmen, white Frenchmen, became the most popular group in France. But nobody here has ever heard of her.
No.
Now, what also makes her interesting, she is Taj Mahal's youngest sister. The whole family is talented.
Sure.
But we don't hear from her because her star could not be born in the United States. Like James Baldwin, she had to go someplace else. So we valorize this story of A Star is Born. But what about all the Black stars that could not be born because of racism in America? So here's a woman who died before she was 50, 20 years ago, and she was such a phenomena in France, in Paris, that when she died, the French government contacted her family and said, she belongs to us. Wow. We would be honored if you would allow us to bury her here. And that's what they did. There are two famous cemeteries in Paris. One is where Baldwin and Richard Wright are buried and some other people. Oh. And then there's one for artists, and that's where she's buried. So her material will be there. And the irony is that she grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is just down the road from UMass Amherst. We need to have her, just like we've reclaimed Josephine Baker. This woman was pretty much a modern day Josephine Baker, and yet nobody knows her name. She's another hidden figure. So part of what the archive is intent on doing is becoming a home. And in the sense of home, I mean a safe space, a rallying point, a nurturing space for Black women's stories to be collected, organized, preserved, our photographs, our papers, our published and unpublished work, the things we started on and didn't finish, the articles that we wrote that didn't get published because they didn't like our perspective on things. Those things need to be preserved so that we don't lose it, because we've grown up in a time when we now understand the significance of history. We know what it means to have been born of enslaved parents whose histories did not get preserved. I don't know who my ancestors are. I can only go back so far because my mother was born at a time when white people did not allow Black people's births to be recorded. She's born in a little town like Peachtree, Lower Peachtree, Alabama. You know, my daddy was born in Georgetown, Mississippi. I've traveled there. It's this big. You travel outside of the GPS and it's like it just disappears off the map. You know, you go 2 inches too far. So these are people who were not literate. My father dropped out of school when he was second grade. His grandparents were dead before he was born. So the tracing that is so wonderful on Ancestry, it's nice when you have literate people. Okay, and nothing to be taken away from that. But what about all the people who were just ordinary folk, who were farmers, who could barely read and write, but who made sure that their children had a better life and who were educated? Where is their story? Or the family that gave birth to both the Taj Mahal on one hand, who was an iconic figure in American music and Black American music, and a daughter who goes on to France and becomes a phenomena. Why? We need to put those two stories together. The only way to do that is to reclaim her and say she also belongs to us here, and we can do that in the archive.
We're out of time now. What a wonderful conversation. I got a headache, Irma, as I said, right? So this tells me it's time to stop talking right now and to thank you for being you. Dr. Irma McFarlane, thank you so much. And Brenda, we both shut you out of the conversation, but I know your job is to write and to listen. So thank you for bearing witness.
Yes,
Brenda.
Thank you for listening. And I want to talk to you about what are you going to do with your stuff too, in terms of archiving. So we should have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I have an archive. I've been intentional in keeping everything. We lost some stuff when we transferred our web stuff, you know that. But by and large, I have everything I've ever done. And I've been keeping it, and I know where it is, and I have an awareness of the value. I value it. Other people may not, but I believe it has great value. So yeah, but how do we preserve that is the question.
Right, yes, and Ms. Brenda too. Is hopefully you've been thinking about your archive and the work that you do, your writings and published, unpublished, the drafts, the starts, the stops, because that tells the story of the totality of your creative process, and that needs to be preserved.
Started at 5 years old in the back of my father's Buick.
All right.
Doing characters.
Yes.
Yeah.
And people need to know that. And Al, one of the reasons I'm doing an MOU is that I've heard, and I can't verify it, but I've had people say that they've called the University of Minnesota to try and get access to the Givens collection, which is all carved there in Penumbrum. And they say they get no answer. So one of the things that is fundamental to my archive is that it is accessible, not just to academics, but to people's families, to ordinary people who just want to come in and peruse and see what's in there, and that's really important, is that when we turn over these things to colleges and universities, we have to be very clear. They don't own it.
Right.
And we want to make sure that anyone who has access. So one of the other people that is coming into the archive is Z Edgel. I did my field work in Belize. She was Belize's only international author, and she passed away at the end of last year. And her family has agreed, with the proviso that should Belize want to borrow materials, that they can do that. So that we want to make sure that even if it's physically located there, it will be digital, so it will be accessible. But if they actually want to, say, borrow items or objects that tell her story for an exhibit or something, that also is possible. And that agency is left with the family. It's not left with the institution. They're just in some ways caretakers, right? But they're not the people who do the vision. That's what I want to be clear about. It's our vision, it's our work, it's our lives, it's our stories.
I as you're speaking, Irma, I'm remembering that you told me that you knew, and he was a guest in your home, James Baldwin.
Absolutely.
And so that's a story I want to talk about at some point in time. The people that you've connected with, and the personal stuff, not the stuff that you can find easily, but you've got experiences just in probably telling jokes and sharing meals, with people that. I
can tell you what I cooked for him, and
wow.
there are 55. There are 55 photos, because at his 60th birthday party, Maya Angelou was there, as you see, Lerone Bennett. There were all kinds of folk in and out there, and I've got great photographs of me, but I also have pictures of James Baldwin in my backyard. What's wonderful about my photos is that they were taken in private settings. And the Baldwin we see on TV, on Netflix, and these things, he's very tense and he's very, but this Baldwin is smiling and relaxed. And I've got a great one of him with my mom. And so those are the kinds of things. That's a different Baldwin than what the white world wants us to see. It's a lens. The gaze is a Black gaze of someone who was just adoring of him because of his talent, who was a burgeoning writer. I was doing this when I just started my MFA program. And so I am both honored and humble, but also to see this person who was so approachable and so genuine, was really amazing. And people like Sonia Sanchez, I used to help her cook and take care of her twins, and, class one day and then go to her house and just kind of listen to how she formulated poetry. I mean, so it's I want to share that. Yeah. So that's also part of the trajectory.
Well, let's let this be one of the venues for the sharing. Great. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you. Brenda, what you want to add to this? We close out right now.
It was just wonderful. It's inspiring, but I have a lot of work to do. And I'm just thrilled. But I learned so much from your articles.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wrote on Naomi as well.
Yes.
Because my daughter was a tennis player.
Okay.
Yeah. And she experienced a lot of racism.
Yeah.
A lot. Yeah.
But I think preserving her story. And so the next time I'm in Minneapolis, we have to get together. So I'm
in the mountains of Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Then I was just in Santa Fe. So
are you kidding?
No, I know one of the people I work with is a woman of the Laguna people in Albuquerque, but I was just in New Mexico, Santa Fe, for the museum anthropology conference.
No kidding.
Yes. So I'll have to remember that. I'll get your contact from.
I started coming here at 6.
Okay.
Yeah, and fell in love with the town, but it's not the same anymore.
No,
But
it's
that's
changed
okay.
a lot.
Yeah.
A lot, yes. But when I get to that area, and I may be coming again, I'll definitely look you
Oh,
up.
please do.
Yes,
Please
yes.
do.
That's good to know. One of my favorite spots. So Al, once again, you've brought us together, and thank you for giving me a chance to tell this story. It is so important to me.
And you tell it so well. It's you can listen for days and days and days, Irma.
I was just mesmerized. I loved it.
Well, we will be visible and we will be heard. And I'm indebted to the UMass Magazine for giving me the space, to write that and letting me say it in my own words as opposed to interviewing me, and for allowing you to publish it. So thank you once again for spreading the word. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I think we're done.
So Al, will you let me know when this will be aired or where I can get the link to it?
Sure. It's live right now at Black Press USA.
Oh, Black Press. Okay.
Black Press USA, and also at the Inside News Facebook page, Al McFarlane Facebook page. And so you can get the link and share it, but it's live right now.
I'll be tweeting it right now.
Yep.
And which one do you prefer that I use? Because I'm going to tweet. I can put all of them in there, but which is
put them both in? Both of them. Promote Black Press USA because they've got a great audience, and then use the Inside News Facebook page as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay.
Okay, well, I'm going to sign off.
I love the intro. I mean, that is so powerful to start.
Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you on the ground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you break.
We've had enough
of all the money you make.
We've had enough.
No more life at stake.
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.
It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait.
Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you were breaking.
We've had enough
of all the money you were making.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.
Free or guilty,
It's gonna get filthy.
better believe. Just roll up your sleeves.
It's gonna get rough. It's gonna be tough.
We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough
Of all the rules you're breaking.
We've had enough.
All the money you're making.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is the proclamation.
We've had enough.
Trayvon Martin and Tommy Rice.
We've had enough.
Michael Brown and Eric gonna pay the price.
We've had enough.
Philando, Breonna, George Floyd.
What? We've had enough.
So many